Hello, I am Johanna. I'm one of DigVentures community archaeologists, and some of you might know me from the finds room, where I usually work and make sure that everything gets cleaned, everything that gets in from the trenches gets identified, sorted to different categories, and then ready to be sent off to the specialist. So some of you might have been to excavations with us before, and you will have seen that we usually get a lot of pottery out of the trenches. So that could be anything from medieval pottery to Bronze Age, Iron Age, so prehistoric pottery, also Roman pottery, post-medieval pottery, even modern pottery, just pottery everywhere. So what do you do if you actually hold a piece of history in your hand? Some of you might actually have found a piece of pot or another find yourself, be it by just walking along the beach or maybe doing some field walking, kicking some molehills, or even just digging in your garden for vegetables, or why would you dig in your garden? Out of fun, whatever. So yeah, you have a piece of history in your hand. What do you do next? So today I am going to show you how to clean pottery and also how to identify some different types of pottery, some different periods, and you can join in from home. So I'm really happy that you're all tuned in. So before we start and really get into it, I thought it would be fun to just cover a tiny bit of pottery history and a couple of things that archaeologists need to know when finding pottery. So pottery is really important to store and collect liquids and food, to cook. And yeah, just imagine for just a tiny moment that you don't have any boxes, bowls, Tupperware, plates, pans, pots in your house, and just imagine how you would continue with your everyday life. So because of that, people started making pottery quite early on. So we have people in the Neolithic, so about 10,000 years ago, who already started making pottery. However, recently they discovered that one of the earliest pots is apparently almost 20,000 years old and was found in China. So that's a really long time and shows that basically pottery is a basic need for people, and they had to figure out quite quickly, once they started to settle, how they wanted to keep their food, how they could cook, all of these things. And yet the way that pottery is being made hasn't really changed that much from the Neolithic time to today. So obviously today now a lot happens in factories, but the way that they did pots in the Neolithic, for example, was that they either did pinch pots or they used coil or ring building technique, and I would love to show you how it really works, but as you can see, I'm kind of confined to my home, as most of you will probably be as well at this moment. So I got some modeling clay for children, which is at the moment the only thing that I have. So just imagine for a moment that this is actual clay, and I mentioned pinch pots. So the way that a pinch pot works is that you kind of just use this ball of clay, and with your thumbs slowly form a little hollow, and then obviously potters would have been much more skilled at this than me, but I'm doing my best, so please don't judge too much. Also, this is a really small example, but yeah, so after a while then you would have a little pot, and if you're very skilled at it, or you just are a perfectionist, you would make it all nice and smooth. You might do like little decorations in it, like I do now with my nails, as you can see, or they would use little plants that they would press into it, and then you would have, like, for example, grain patterns on it. But basically this is a really easy way of making a pot. Make a base and then you put it into the kiln to fire. The second method is ring building, coil building, and for that I have a lot of little worm-like things, and you would make a ring, and then on top of that ring you would put another ring, and you would slowly but steadily build the side of the pot. Obviously all of this would happen with much more skill than I possess, and also much bigger. And then they would press all of this together and kind of smear the outside and the inside, so you have then a nice and proper pot. What makes a pot really interesting is if it has some decorations on it. So I just mentioned, for example, pressing your thumbs, pressing some leaves into the clay. And although the Greeks and the Romans, for example, started to paint their pots or used molds, as you'll later learn, so keep that in mind, molds, with very intricate designs, glaze as such didn't really take off in the UK until the Middle Ages. And you might have come across this very particular green glaze that you can see just up here, which is almost always medieval. So when you see this shade of green, then you can be sure that you hold a piece of medieval pottery in your hands. So sometimes you find pots in the UK that are very smooth, very shiny. They could be Roman, they could be Iron Age, earlier than that, and you would think that it's glazed, but it's actually not, and that's a technique that's called burnishing, and that was a way to get your pottery really nice and shining by just polishing it until it looks really nice and almost as if it was glazed. When archaeologists find a piece of pottery, then there are different things that they look for in order to identify the vessel that this pottery sherd would have belonged to, and also give an idea of how old that pot would have been. So for example, if you have part of the rim of a pot, then that helps you to understand the size of the pot. So because if you have part of the rim, we have something like rim charts where you can then put that rim on, and it actually gives you an idea of how big the entire pot would have been. Also glaze, it helps you with dating, it helps you also with location. As I said already, that green glaze, that very medieval glaze, if you find a pot with that glaze on it, then you can be almost certainly be sure that it's sometime during the medieval ages, probably like 1200, 1400, 1500, around that time. Then very, very, very important, and this is also why we go into cleaning later, is the fabric of the pot. So the fabric tells you what kind of clay was used and how that clay was fired. So that is the color, the different colors that we look for. It's also whether there are different layers in the pot, and also if it has any inclusions. So inclusions could be, for example, quartz, it could be little bits of flint, it could be shell, it could be sand, anything that they added to the clay for tempering, so that the clay is a better quality and won't break during firing. And then, last but not least, almost last, and certainly not least, is the firing process. So depending on the color of the clay, you can see that sometimes it's very red, sometimes it's grey, and that tells us how much oxygen was actually added to the kiln. So if you have a very red clay, then you know that a lot of oxygen was added to the kiln. And now this is last, and that is decorations, maker's marks, anything that helps you identify the pot a bit better, that makes it not just a random pot, but a little bit of a special pot. A lot of potters had the same way of decorating their pots that they just kept using. So if you find a pot with the same glazing, the same paint on it, the same assemblage of pattern, then you can almost always kind of do a connection. Now, if you imagine finding a piece of pottery in the ground and it's been lying there for ages, it's been covered in mud, you probably won't see very much of the colour or of any inclusions or anything that's on it. You might not even be sure if what you're holding is just a stone. So there's a very easy solution, and that is cleaning. And for that, I am going to call David, who is at the moment as well at home. He's been working at Whitnam Clumps, but he's going to tell you about that in a bit. And he has a lot of pottery that he has to clean at the moment. So I would say I'll just call him and we'll just check in with him and see how he's doing and how we clean pottery. Hello, David. How are you?
Hello, I'm very good, thank you.
Can you maybe just really quickly tell us what you're doing and who you are?
So I've been watching some of the pottery that we've had at the Earth Trust site, and I'm a community archaeologist at DigVentures.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see all the finds. I know that you've been working really, really hard on getting them all clean so we can see the details and we can send them off to the specialist to learn more about them. But first, I want to show everyone at home how we actually clean pottery. So first things first, we need tools. What do you need? What do you use to clean finds, clean pottery?
So first of all, we need a toothbrush, a tub of water that's about room temperature, and then sometimes we need a toothpick to pick off the encrusted mud, and finally a finds tray where we can dry the bits of find.
Lovely. So we are ready to get started. What's first?
So we take a piece of pot, and as you can see, there's bits of mud encrusted on the inside.
Yeah.
So we gently, with the toothpick, brush away some of it.
So can you just explain why you use a toothpick and why you don't just start with water right away?
So if we start with water straight away, it's going to get very, very muddy, and it's going to be hard to make it really clean.
Okay, so I understand. That makes sense.
Yeah. So now we move on. We dip our toothbrush in our water, and we very gently clean like so.
Right, so why, just for those at home who've never done this before, why do you not just put the pottery in the water, but instead you put the toothbrush in the water and then brush the pottery?
Because in some cases, bits of pottery that are very degraded, they can literally just disappear in the tub of water, and we really don't want that because we're going to lose data.
We don't want that. So instead, we just take the toothbrush and brush very gently, depending on the material that you have. Whether it's very soft pottery, you have to be very gentle, maybe even use a children's toothbrush because you might leave grooves in the pottery. And then you just steadily brush away, and we can already see in the piece that David is cleaning there that the color has changed. So it started out as a very gray lump of pottery, and now we can see that it's red on the outside and then a black bit around where it's broken. So it's really important, this bit where the pot is broken, because a lot of people put a lot of attention to actually clean the outside and the inside, get that really nice and clean. But in order for us to identify the pot, we need to know the fabric, and the fabric you can see in the break. So there you can see that it's very black. We can also see some little white bits. Those are the inclusions. So I guess they are either shell or quartz. And all of that helps us identify kind of date when it was made, what clay was used for, what they used for tempering, for example. That's lovely. I think that's done. That's one piece of pottery cleaned.
And we let it dry. And once it's dry, we bag it and we count the number of pottery sherds within that context. Once we've done that, we weigh it. And once we weighed it, that will then go to the specialist.
Perfectly. As I've explained earlier today, it's really, really, really important to clean the pottery, because only then can we see all the things that we need as archaeologists and as pottery specialists to identify the pottery. We can see the fabric, we can see the colors, we can see the inclusions, the layers, we can see whether there is any glaze or any painting, whether there is any decoration, if it was made in a mold, if it maybe even has a little maker's mark. So all these things we only see after we clean the pottery. So that's really, really important. It's a really necessary step. So I would say, David, you have a lot of pottery in your garden at the moment. Can you maybe just tell us a little bit about it and which side it's from?
So all of the pottery that I have at the moment, is from the Earth Trust. Mm-hmm. Now, the Earth Trust is close by to an Iron Age hill fort called Whitnam Clumps in Oxfordshire. And in terms of the actual archaeology features that we have on site, we have a number of Iron Age roundhouses. Now, this suggests that there is a settlement about 2,500 years ago, and it's where people lived, they farmed, they animal husbandry, that sort of thing. And then we also have a Roman building. Now, the interpretation at the moment is that the Roman settlement came a couple of hundred years later than the Iron Age, and this building is about 37 meters long. It has 5 or 6 column bases at the bottom, now being destroyed by ploughing, and certainly there was robbing. There's a high percentage of Roman pottery in the ditches next to the building. Now, this suggests that when the building was abandoned, there was just a massive dump of pottery within those ditches. And about 70% of this pottery is Roman, compared to about 30% Iron Age. And we're getting really fancy stuff. We're getting painted Roman finewares. And then on the flip side, we have really degraded stuff, which I have to be really careful when I'm washing and can literally just disappear.
Okay, I would say let's start with the basics then. You say Iron Age pottery, Roman pottery. How can we tell the difference? What's Roman, what's Iron Age?
So, starting with the Iron Age pottery, there is a massive difference in Iron Age pottery from the early stuff compared to the late stuff. But we are getting, on this side, mainly late Iron Age pottery. So late Iron Age pottery is handmade, and so this means that they're basically taking the clay and they're molding it into the shape they want, or they're creating coils with the pieces of clay. When they're firing it, it's very, very basic. It's little more than a bonfire. In some cases, maybe an insulated bonfire with clay built up around it, and then when it's fired, that's destroyed. It is very temporary in terms of industry. What's actually very distinctive is that there are bits of shell and grit, and in some cases organic material within it to bind it and keep it together. They haven't got the technique that the Roman pottery has yet. Now, the Roman pottery is mostly wheel thrown, which basically means they are making it on a potter's wheel, and this creates distinctive grooves on the inside. The firing process has improved a lot more than the Iron Age. So there's examples of mass industries of Roman pot being produced, and the structures are their actual proper structures. They are stone lines. They're large buildings essentially.
So you can basically imagine it kind of like factory setup where they just keep going on producing pottery. Yeah.
Also, many vessels are dipped into a slip, which is basically clay with a bit of water, and they dip it in before they fire it, and it creates a really smooth surface.
So that's what some people then mistake as a glaze. So they think it's a glaze because it's really shiny and really nice and smooth, but in fact it's actually just slipware. Yeah. Okay, good. Then I would say we now have heard Roman versus Iron Age. Roman is better quality. It's often finer, smoother. So I would say let's put that knowledge to the test and see if everyone at home could actually differentiate between an Iron Age piece of pottery and a Roman piece of pottery. And I think you probably have 2 pieces lying around somewhere randomly.
So we have this.
Okay.
Example number 1.
It has a little hole in it.
Yeah.
All right.
And then example number 2.
Okay, so remember what David said about how the different pots were made, whether they were made by hand or with some other help, what materials were used. So we have both of those, this one and the second one. So what do you think at home? Which one do you think is Roman? Which one do you think is Iron Age? I know that I have my opinion of which one's which. So let's see what you think. And David, maybe tell us the answer.
So this is Iron Age. It has the bits of shell on the inside. And what's really interesting is it has a nail hole. So there's another bit that fits together with it. There's like so. So we're thinking that there could be some sort of string. So it's likely to be a cooking vessel.
It also looks quite big. I mean, this is just a tiny bit of it, and it doesn't have a lot of curve.
Sort of come round like maybe even bigger than that. It's a very large vessel.
Quite a lot of stew.
And then this is the Roman. Now it has the grooves on the inside from being well thrown, and really nice base. So it could be like a beaker for like drinking or something similar.
Lovely. All right then. I hope that you at home got it right. So you said that on site you did have a lot of Roman pottery, 70% of Roman pottery and only 30% of Iron Age pottery. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about the different types of Roman pottery that you found, and maybe even if you have a favorite, something that you're partial to now that you've cleaned so many of them?
Yeah. So there are two very basic types. There's kitchenware and there's tableware. So kitchenware is your everyday cooking, like sort of cheaper kind of pot, and it's less well made and more easily discarded. So I'm just going to talk through a couple of examples. So we have stuff called mortarium, which was used as a mixing bowl, and this had a prominent rim and a spout to grind food, paint, and that sort of thing. What's really distinctive on the inside of it is it has grit and sand and various other stuff on it to sort of help grind it. It's sort of like a softer mortar and pestle. And then we have stuff called flagons. So these are mainly used for pouring wine and very popular with the army. And the shape of the flagons varies. They can either be single-handled or double-handled. And this is what I believe is an example of a flagon. Now, you can see here that this is broken just below the top of the handle, and the pouring lip is still whole. This here is where the handle would have been, and it would have come round about to there.
That's quite big.
And yeah, it's quite a big jug. Now, I'm obviously not a pottery expert, but based on a little bit of research, I think this is Oxfordshire colour coat, which Earth Trust is in Oxfordshire kind of makes sense.
So locally made.
Locally made, yeah. Now, moving on to tableware. This is your really nice stuff. This is like the china that you get out at Christmas.
So not IKEA.
Not IKEA. And a lot of this stuff is actually imported from other places in the empire. And just like some of this is really nice. So we get examples of painted pot like this.
That's lovely.
Yeah. But probably the most famous and most popular, certainly within the fineware market, is Samian ware. Now, this is distinguished with a very deep red coat on the outside, and it also is dipped in a slip before it's fired to make it really, really nice. Now, this pottery is mainly imported from Gaul, and we have three types. We have plain, which can sometimes have the potter's stamp on the bottom. We have decorated stuff, which when the pot is made in the clay, it's pressed into a mold, and this creates patterns once it's fired. And then we have fake Samian or imitation, which is Samian that is produced in Britain, but it's kind of the off-brand version. It's not as good. It's the clay's inferior, and it doesn't last as well as Samian. So, yeah. So now we're going to do a little guessing game again. We're going to see if you can identify the kitchenware and the fineware. So this example, we have this stuff here.
So that's number 1, and we can see that there is something on the pottery. It almost looks like leaves.
Yeah.
Quite pretty. And the other one?
And then example number 2.
All right, so we see a difference in color, a difference in the texture. Maybe, yeah. So what do you think, you guys at home? Which one is tableware? Which one is the everyday stuff?
Right. So this is decorated Samian. So this is the fineware. This is stuff that is pressed into a mold before it's fired. You can see that it's very, very nicely made. It's got the nicely deep red color slip. And then this stuff is the mortaria. And you can see the bits of grit and whatever embedded on the inside there.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's really good. I think we've learned a lot today. So let's just very quickly talk a little bit more about what happens when we send the pottery off to specialists. So David already said we count it, we weigh it, we put it into bags, and it gets sent off. And sometimes we even send pottery to the lab. So there are different things that we can do, like lipid analysis. For example, if there is still some residue in the pot, you would maybe want to tell us a bit more about that, about what we can then actually find out about how people lived and what they ate.
So we can sometimes find bits of organic stuff, so like food or wine or something nice on the inside, and then we can identify that and can put a date to it.
So that's really good. I have to say, I personally, what I love about cleaning pottery is when you find traces from the person who either made it or used it. So for example, if you have thumbprints that you can still see in the pot after it was fired, or I once found a piece of pot. It was not very old, but it was just a tiny piece, and it had apparently drawn by a child a little figure drawn onto it, and that was just something that really touched me personally, because I thought like it gives you that connection to the past. And again, you only see these things after you clean the pot properly. I don't know about you, if there is anything that you really like about pot, but
I absolutely love refitting bits. So that bit of Samian that I showed you earlier, it fits together with another piece.
Ooh, yeah, that's a very satisfying feeling. Okay, well then I would say thank you, David, for telling us all of this, for letting us be part of your cleaning experience, and thank you for giving us a little bit of spring from your garden. That's really nice. Yeah, thank you, and
thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, that was really interesting to see some of the pottery from Earth Trust. Now you know how to clean pottery, and hopefully also how to tell whether it's Iron Age pottery or Roman pottery, or maybe even medieval, if you remember what I said at the beginning. If you at home would like you to carry on learning more about pottery, there is plenty you can do. First of all, do you have any ceramics in your house that are older than yourself? Just have a little think about that. And then, which of your kitchenwares would you like archaeologists in the future to find? And maybe also, what would that say about you? So just think a little bit about what we talked about, the tableware, the kitchenware, stuff that you just use for, random cooking. You don't really care what people think about it, because nobody will ever see it. So yeah, just have a think about that and tell us in the comments below. And then you can also have a look at some virtual artifacts. So we dropped some links into the description of the video where you can see a close look of some pottery artifacts or artifacts in general, and you can just really zoom in and see them in front of you, turn them around, have a look if you see any inclusions, anything of those things that we learned about today. And finally, you can also practice cleaning at home. So I certainly have a toothbrush, and I think you all hopefully have one as well. Yeah, it's honestly much more satisfying than cleaning the dishes. So if you maybe have a broken flower pot at home, or something else that's been, plate that fell down, just give it a go. Give it a brush with the toothbrush and just enjoy the satisfaction of seeing it come clean and actually discovering the different intricate layers, inclusions, all these little things. And maybe you'll see your dishes or your old flower pot in a completely different way than you had before. Also, if you do have some modeling clay at home, give it a go. Make your own pot. Think about what you would use to decorate it, things that you have at home. As I said, maybe some flowers, maybe some string. Just have a think, be creative, and maybe post some pictures again in the comments, or just send us some pictures on Twitter. It would be lovely. Really love to see what you're coming up with. So that's all for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.